The first thing I noticed was the way her hands shook when the music started, like she was afraid joy might break something inside her if she held it too tightly. That was the moment I knew this night would change all of us, not just her. If you believe stories about unexpected kindness, about people defying the roles the world assigns them, go ahead and like and subscribe right now. Because what happened next reminded me that hope doesn't ask permission to show up, it just does. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It all really began with a sentence so small, it almost slipped through the cracks of the room. I was volunteering that afternoon at the community center, the kind of place that smelled like overcooked vegetables and floor cleaner, where time moved slower and loneliness sat down at every table uninvited. The center hosted a weekly soup lunch for seniors, and it was my turn to help serve and keep people company. I'd learned quickly that the food mattered less than the listening. That's when Margaret spoke. She was sitting near the window, sunlight falling across her thin white hair, hands folded neatly like she was afraid to take up too much space. Someone mentioned the Valentine's Day dance the center was planning. Paper hearts, donated cookies, a DJ with a laptop, and good intentions. Most people smiled politely. A few joked about aching knees. Margaret didn't smile. "I've never been to a dance," she said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just honest. At first, I thought I misheard her. 82 years old, sharp eyes, clear voice. Surely she meant not in a long time. But when someone laughed and said, "Oh, come on, not even when you were young?" Margaret shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "Not once." The table went quiet in that uncomfortable way people get when reality shows up uninvited. She stared down at her soup, suddenly embarrassed, like she'd revealed something indecent instead of heartbreaking. I watched her shoulders hunch, decades of learned smallness pulling her inward. She explained, almost apologetically. Married young. Husband who didn't like crowds. Then work, then caretaking, then widowhood. Life stacked its reasons neatly on top of her wants until she couldn't see them anymore. "I always figured someday," she added, voice barely above a whisper. But someday kept getting busy. That's when I noticed him. He was sitting 2 tables over, leather vest draped over the back of his chair, gray beard tucked into his collar. He didn't fit the room at all. Too solid, too loud even when he was still. A Hell's Angels patch peeked out from under his jacket. The club donated food every month, and a few of the guys would show up to help unload boxes, usually keeping to themselves. This one didn't say a word. He just listened. His eyes never left Margaret. Later, I learned his road name was Bear. Decades on a bike. Decades of people crossing the street to avoid him. In that moment, though, all I saw was a man sitting very still, like he was afraid if he moved, he might miss something important. When lunch ended, Margaret thanked everyone for the meal and stood slowly, gathering her coat. Bear held the door for her. Their eyes met for half a second. She smiled politely, the way women of her generation had been taught to smile at men who took up space. He nodded back, respectful, quiet. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, Bear came back, not with boxes of canned food, but with questions. He asked about Margaret, where she lived, whether she had family, whether she'd be coming to the Valentine's dance. I answered carefully, not sure where this was going. Only that something in his tone told me it mattered. "She probably won't go," I said. She said she wouldn't know what to do. Bear exhaled through his nose, slow and heavy. "Yeah," he muttered. "A lot of people don't." That night, he took the story with him to the clubhouse. I wasn't there, but I heard later how it spread. How one man's quiet anger at time itself turned into an idea too big to ignore. How a sentence, "She never got her dance," hit a room full of bikers like a punch to the chest. Men who'd missed graduations, birthdays, second chances. Men who knew all about the things you don't get back. Someone joked at first. Someone always does. But the laughter didn't last. Because once you really hear something like that, you can't unhear it. Plans started small, then grew teeth. Phone calls. Favors. A hall donated by a veterans group. A band that owed someone a favor. Flowers bought in bulk. A dress, simple, blue, elegant, offered by a shop owner who said, "Don't tell her the price. Just tell her it's a gift." No one told Margaret. They wanted it to be a surprise. The morning of the event, I went to her apartment to invite her to what I called a small community gathering. She hesitated, standing in her doorway, cardigan buttoned raw. "I don't really belong at parties," she said. I smiled and told her she belonged more than she knew. When we arrived at the hall that evening, the parking lot was full. Motorcycles lined the edges like sentries, chrome catching the fading light. Margaret stopped walking. "Oh my," she said softly. "I think we're in the wrong place." Then the doors opened, and that's when she saw them. Row after row of bikers, standing shoulder to shoulder, quiet as a held breath. 140 men and women, leather vests gleaming, each holding a single paper carnation. No engines, no bravado, just waiting. Music began, slow, gentle, forgiving. Margaret's hand tightened around my arm, and Bear stepped forward. When Bear reached her, the room seemed to shrink around them, like the rest of us had stepped back without meaning to. Margaret stood frozen, eyes wide, the blue dress brushing her ankles as if it didn't quite believe it belonged to her. The band kept playing softly, a song chosen for people who were unsure of their feet and braver than they felt. Bear didn't rush her. He simply held out his hand, palm up, steady as a promise. "I don't really dance," she said, her voice trembling despite the smile she tried to hold in place. "Neither do most of us," Bear replied, and something in that made her laugh. A small, surprised sound that cracked the tension like glass. She took his hand. The first steps were awkward. Margaret's shoulders were stiff, her movements careful, like she was navigating a narrow ledge. Bear matched her pace without comment, guiding rather than leading. Around them, the bikers began to move too, pairing off or forming loose circles, swaying in a way that felt more like support than performance. There was no crowding, no pressure, just space. Space she'd never been given before. I watched her face change minute by minute. The tight lines around her mouth softened. Her eyes lifted from the floor. She stopped apologizing with her body. At one point, she closed her eyes completely, resting her head lightly against Bear's chest, as if testing whether the moment was real. When she opened them again, they were shining. Someone brought her a corsage. Someone else fixed the clasp on her necklace when her fingers fumbled. A biker with tattooed hands knelt to adjust the hem of her dress so she wouldn't trip. These were small things, almost invisible on their own, but together they built something Margaret had never had: safety without strings attached. She danced with nearly everyone that night, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Each song brought a new partner, a new story murmured close to her ear. Tales of long roads, lost friends, bad choices survived. She told them about her sister, about factory shifts, about the husband who never liked music. No one rushed her. No one corrected her. They listened like her words mattered because they did. At one point, she sat down to catch her breath, laughing softly, cheeks flushed pink. "I didn't know it was supposed to feel like this," she said to me, almost conspiratorial. "I thought dancing was about knowing the steps." I shook my head. "Turns out it's about knowing you're not alone." As the night went on, the room filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with the lights. Phones stayed mostly tucked away. This wasn't a spectacle. It was a gift being opened slowly, carefully. The band played old standards, then something livelier, and Margaret surprised everyone by insisting on trying a faster song. Her steps were uneven, but her laughter rang out, bright and unrestrained, the sound of someone reclaiming a piece of herself she thought was gone forever. Near the end of the night, Bear walked her outside for air. The parking lot was quiet now, bikes resting under the stars. Margaret wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and looked back at the hall. "I spent so long thinking I missed my chance," she said. "Like life closed a door, and that was that." Bear shook his head slowly. "Doors don't always close," he said. "Sometimes we just don't know who's on the other side yet." She reached out and squeezed his hand, her grip stronger than before. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing me." He swallowed, nodding once. "Thank you for trusting us." When I took her home later, she moved differently, taller somehow, lighter. Before getting out of the car, she smoothed the skirt of her dress and smiled to herself, as if committing the night to memory. The next week, she told me she hung the dress on the outside of her closet, where she could see it every morning. "Not to save it," she said, "to remind myself." And maybe that was the real dance, not the music or the steps, but the moment she finally let herself be chosen, and chose joy right back. In the weeks that followed, the night didn't fade the way moments usually do. It stayed with Margaret, settling into her days like a quiet, steady warmth. She started coming to the community center earlier, lingering longer, sitting closer to people instead of near the walls. When someone mentioned the dance, she didn't look embarrassed anymore. She smiled, slow, knowing, and said, "It was lovely," as if that single word could carry everything it had given her. Bear and a few of the bikers kept stopping by, always casual, never making a show of it. Sometimes they brought groceries. Sometimes they just sat and listened. Margaret learned their names, their habits, the way grief and loyalty lived side by side in all of them. She baked cookies once, burned the first batch, laughed at herself, tried again. It became a routine no one announced, but everyone noticed. What surprised me most was how the story traveled. People who had crossed the street when they saw leather vests now stopped to say hello. Not because the bikers changed, but because something softened in the way others saw them. Kindness has a way of rewriting fear when you let it be witnessed. One afternoon, I asked Margaret if the night made her sad, if it reminded her of all the years she'd gone without. She thought for a long moment before answering. "No," she said. "It taught me something, that it's not about how long you wait. It's about what you're willing to accept when the moment finally comes." She passed away quietly the following spring. At her memorial, there were flowers from neighbors, from the center, from people I'd never met. And parked along the street, stretching farther than anyone expected, were motorcycles, engines silent, helmets tucked under arms. The bikers stood at the back, respectful, present, just like they had been that first night. Margaret had danced once in her life, but she was seen every day after. And that, I think, is what stays with me most. Sometimes the smallest kindness arrives late, but when it does, it changes the shape of everything that comes after.